Welcome to the Frist Art Museum. We are in the galleries now with the exhibition J.M.W. Turner, Quest for the Sublime. This is a wonderful exhibition. I am going to walk you through, and we're going to take a look at some of these masterworks, not necessarily through the eyes of an art historian, but imagining ourselves as if we are within the mind of the painter himself. The exhibition itself comes to us from the Tate in London, and the Tate has over 1,000 works by J.M.W. Turner. So much that gives us so much information about one of the most important and transformational painters of the 19th century. Somebody whose work we look at today with very modern eyes as a precursor to some of the developments of late 19th century art, such as Impressionism, and even 20th century art, such as Abstract Expressionism. So to understand a creative person, sometimes it's helpful to look at their younger years. What really inspired them to become an artist in the first place? What were their experiences? How did they learn? Turner was a lower middle class Cockney kid in London. He really didn't have a lot of advantages. His father was a barber. His mother came from a family of butchers. His mother actually developed psychological problems, and she passed away in the hospital known as Bethlehem, or otherwise known as Bedlam. So he probably had a very difficult childhood as a young man. He went to the Royal Academy of Art, was admitted at the age of 14, which was a typical age for a young person who wanted to be an artist. Before then, he had actually drawn. He'd gone to the seaside and done a lot of sketching, and his father sold his drawings out of his barber shop. So early on, he saw that there was commercial potential in being an artist. He could make a living as an artist early on. At the Royal Academy, he studied drawing. He studied the old masters, contemporary masters, and really learned how to make paintings and drawings in a way that other academicians were doing at the time. You know, basically looking at yourself in the context of the past, in the context of art history. The popular movement of the day was Romanticism, and Turner was a classic Romanticist, if that's not an oxymoron. For Turner, the idea, and for the Romantics, the idea was that in spite of the rise of empiricism, the rise of the Enlightenment, in which human reason was seen as being the driving force behind human progress, the Romantics were interested in emotion, strong emotion. They were interested in the imagination, in dreams, the power of color to transform the viewer and to convey something really innate and powerful to a viewer that had nothing to do with reason, that went beyond reason. So the Romantics were interested in something called the Sublime. For them, the Sublime meant that you were in confrontation with these forces of the universe that were much greater than you. And in some ways, these forces could give you a sense of oneness, a sense of participation in the ocean, if you're looking at the ocean, in the starry sky, if you're looking at that, but also a sense of fear. The idea that you are in some ways inconsequential when confronted with the forces of the universe, with the power of nature. And so one of the favorite subjects for a lot of Romantic artists was the sea. The sea really embodied the sublime. So Turner's first painting to be shown at the Royal Academy, shown when he was only 21 years old, is called Fisherman at Sea. And this is a painting that shows fishermen braving the elements, going up against the huge swelling waves off the Isle of Wight. It's a work of the imagination. Turner wasn't there in another boat trying to capture it, but he does capture the sensation of these fishermen battling nature, confronting nature. We don't know whether nature is going to drown the fishermen or whether they're going to return safely to their home. So it's a really classic kind of idea of what Romantic painting is all about, that idea of risk, the idea of confronting the unknown, confronting nature, the idea that humanity needed to be in some way humble in the face of nature. It's something that we really understand today. One of the things that the Romantics thought with regard to the Sublime was that you didn't really want to be in the middle of something terrifying. in order to have this feeling, this powerful emotion. You wanted to be able to see it from a safe distance. If you can picture an equivalent of looking at a horror movie. You know, you don't want to be inside what's happening in the horror movie. You want to see it from knowing that you're safe, from a safe distance, and therefore you'll get this aesthetic response to it. So that idea of distancing was something that was critical to the Romantics' approach to art making. So it's almost as if you're looking through a window. You're looking at this painting, the fisherman heading out to sea off the Isle of Wight, but we know that we're safe. We're on the other side of the painting. We're on the other side of the window. So when we talk about the ocean, the impact of the ocean on the human imagination, we oftentimes describe moods, the moods of the ocean, and compare the moods of the ocean to the moods of the individual. You know, whether it's a stormy relationship, you know, tumultuous storm at sea. You know, all of these things correlate between the inside of the individual and the forces of the universe. So the sea was a really powerful subject matter for the Romantics. Another powerful subject matter for the Romantics was the mountains. The mountains were lofty, they were ascendant, they were majestic, they were beautiful, every bit as beautiful as the sea, but they were also dangerous and they were terrifying. And so that sense of mixing the visual pleasure of looking at something extraordinary, something that ascended into the heavens in a way that might remind you of a higher power, but also at the same time knowing that if you went into the mountains, you might not come out again, because they're very, very dangerous places. And so that, again, that frisson of fear that you might feel when you actually went into the mountains was something that really attracted and appealed to the Romantics like Turner. So as a young man, of course, he wanted to paint mountains. The mountains wouldn't come to him in London, so he had to go find the mountains. But he couldn't go to Europe, because at the time the Napoleonic Wars were in effect, and so so travel was impossible to go to France or to go to the Alps. So what he had to do was to travel around the UK, travel around England, Wales, Scotland, and look for the mountains there that he could paint. So this is one of his earliest mountain scenes here, Morning Among the Coniston Fells, and it's a view in the north part of England, in the Lake Country of England. Really a beautiful area, extraordinarily rich, and an area that invited Wordsworth and Coleridge and all the great poets of the Romantic period to go and escape from the cities, to go and contemplate the larger issues of life. And so Turner followed suit, and he painted this beautiful mountain in a way that kind of amplifies the height of the mountain. He makes it seem a little bit more impressive maybe than it really is in real life. And if you look at the painting, you see these mists kind of pouring over the distant hills. You see sheep running down toward a gully. It's all motion. It's all ephemeral. It's all atmosphere. Sometimes when we think of mountains, we think that they're stable, but Turner painted them almost as if they're liquid, as if they're always in a condition of motion. And that was something that he did throughout his life, that idea of painting one element as if it's another element and transforming it all into the liquidity of paint itself. So it's really a beautiful work. It's compelling. He painted it when he was relatively young. He painted it before he had a chance to go to Switzerland, to go to see the Alps for the first time. And as we look at some of the works that he did in Switzerland, we'll see a noticeable difference. The mountains are as majestic in real life as he made this painting of the northern England mountain, English mountain. But there's also a sense of precision in the topography, because he's right in the middle of it. He immersed himself in it. So it's not necessarily a work of the imagination anymore, it's a work of documentation. It's capturing the actual moment of being in the mountains. Turner was a precocious artist, a prodigy. And this was recognized by art patrons of the time, by wealthy supporters and friends. And so they pulled their money together to send him on his first trip to Switzerland in 1802. It was at a time when the hostilities between Britain and France had been suspended briefly by the Treaty of Amiens. And so he had the opportunity to go to Paris, to the Louvre, and see the great old masters who were at the Louvre, and then go on from Paris to Grenoble and all the way through Switzerland, really immersing himself in the mountain scenery that had so fascinated him. And so he traveled by carriage, by horse and carriage. He bought them in France, and then by boat, and then by foot. And so he actually made a long trip throughout Switzerland. And when possible, he would climb into the mountains and try to get the sense of the presence, the physicality of the places that he put himself in. And they were oftentimes very precarious situations. He couldn't carry oil paints and canvases with him, of course, as he clambered up the steep side of a mountain. So he carried sketchbooks with him and did quick sketches, drawings of glaciers, of cliff sides, of rocks, of clouds bursting over the sun bursting through the clouds. And then he would take these back and then fill them in with watercolor. So there's that sense of immediacy of the drawing, and then the sense of reflection back in the studio where he would actually kind of fill in the color. But it's an extraordinary moment, really the turning point, I think, in Turner's evolution, because he realized the importance of personal experience, being there. It's not just an act of the imagination, it's actually really critical for an artist to have that firsthand knowledge, that sense of being in the middle of the mountains and not something that you're looking at as if through a window. Turner had a lot of ideas that came from his Swiss trip, sketches and drawings, also newspaper accounts of things that had happened in Switzerland. So he was inspired to make works of art long after that trip that did relate to his experiences in Switzerland. One of the great paintings in the exhibition is The Fall of an Avalanche in the Grisons. And it's an extraordinary painting because it really captures everything that the Romantics were interested in terms of the relationship between humanity and nature, humanity and the environment. The painting is a tour de force of tragedy. It documents an incident in the Alps in which a rock slide had crushed a chalet that had 25 people in it. Of course, nobody survived. It was all, it was the end for them. And in some ways, it is a history painting. Turner was very interested in the idea of painters trying to capture history, and this was something that was taught at the Royal Academies, that the highest form of painting was history painting, because history paintings tell people about the past. They tell people about the great stories relating to the rise of your nation, great stories relating to religion, relating to mythology, and connecting the European present with the classical past in ancient Rome, for example. So he was really interested in history paintings, but this is a contemporary history painting. This is a painting of the moment. And for Turner, there was no sense of escape from nature. There was no sense that empathy with the condition of the people being destroyed by the avalanche would in any way help them. It was really kind of a tragic scene that showed nature at its most powerful. What I think is really interesting about the painting is that you can really see what Turner is thinking as he made the painting. You can see how he made the painting. If you look at the ice kind of pummeling down the mountain, you can see that it was made with a palette knife, the sharp edge of a palette knife, cutting into that white paint and scraping it away. So the paint itself becomes like ice. He narrows the gap between the material of paint and the subject matter in which he's painting. You can see this wonderful kind of sweep of just brushstrokes coming down from the upper left to the center of the painting, forcing down, countering the energy of the avalanche as it comes in the other direction. So there are these two diagonal forces coming together. Pure paint. It's almost like abstraction, where you're looking at the paint, and the paint becomes the atmosphere. The paint becomes the ice. The paint becomes the cloud. Everything becomes indistinct from one another. And that, I think, is an early example of what Turner would become known for later on. Anybody who's tried to be a painter knows that watercolor is one of the most difficult mediums that you can work with. It's completely unforgiving. You have a white piece of paper and you put something on it and you can't change it. You can add to it, but you can't subtract. You can't cover it up. So you have to be very, very assured in what you're going to do. But the end result is that there is a remarkable luminosity as the whiteness of the paper exudes through the pigment that's on top of it and gives you this sense of light coming from within. And for Turner, light and color were indistinguishable. They were inseparable. They were one and the same. So how in oil painting do you get the same effect? For him, the approach was to paint a field of white oil paint, and then very, very thin layers of tinted color on top of that. So you have that a similar sense of luminosity, but with the advantage of oil paint, where you can change it, you can adapt it, you can scrape it away, you can paint over it, you can cover something up. So it was really the best of both worlds. When the Turner bequest came to the Tate in London, it came with a number of works that were clearly finished works, a number of works that were studies or sketches, and many works that nobody really knew. Did Turner intend for this to be shown in the way that we're looking at it? Is it an unfinished painting? Is it kind of laying the groundwork for something else? And for Turner, it's not unusual for him to have a number of canvases like the one that we're looking at stacked against the wall. And when he wanted to finish a painting, he would pull the canvas out and add some element to it. But for our eyes, for our modern eyes, these look every bit as interesting, even if they're not finished. And that, I think, is one of the things that has inspired us to appreciate Turner, because so much of his work is about understanding the artist's process, looking into the artist's mind, seeing the same thing that he's seeing, and hopefully we're inspired by the same things that he's inspired by.